Nigeria's Minister of Information and National Orientation, Muhammad Idris, has explained that the federal government funded 422 persons in the ongoing COP28 climate summit in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. The minister made this known in a statement following a controversy trailing 1,411 Nigerian registered delegates at the summit. Providing clarity on the controversy, the minister said Nigeria's representation is very much in line with the country's status as Africa's leading sovereign voice and player in climate action. The government said the Nigerian delegation include government officials, representatives from private sector, civil society, the voluntary sector, state governments, media, multilateral institutions, representatives of marginalized communities, and many others. Now, to discuss this further, I'm being joined by a communication strategist, Murkthar Suleiman. Good morning, Murkthar, and thank you so much for joining me on News Central.
Good morning, Dashen. It's also a pleasure to be on News Central.
All right, so the minister has clarified that 422 delegates were sponsored by the federal government to the COP28. Now, in light of the economic challenges, how would you assess the government's decision to send over 1,400 delegates to the summit? Do you believe it reflects the priorities of the government?
First of all, like you've said, and the minister has actually clarified, out of the 1,400 plus delegates who are at the COP28 currently, only about 422 were sponsored by the government. The way these things work is, you actually demystified it a little bit during your report. The way these things work is there are private sector actors who also go there, and all of these private sector actors, CSOs, media, different other organizations, and other forms of sponsorships that were even given by maybe governments of the European Union and other international donor organizations who are operational in Nigeria. So usually this is how these things actually come. But let's speak to the 422, which the government has actually said that is what they sponsored. I think it's still actually a lot, especially at a time where we are crying and clamoring for a cut in the cost of governance. It seems as if the Nigerian government is not looking at the plight of Nigeria, because as much as we understand the realities of the climate change and what it does, of the climate realities, as much as we understand the climate realities, we also need to understand that it is not at the topmost of our priority currently. It will be very difficult for you to explain why it makes sense to an average, maybe baggy farmer who was thinking that by November they should be harvesting, but instead rain. There was a heavy downpour in Abuja. It's very difficult for you to explain to that particular person why the government going to discuss these issues in Dubai and how that is going to actually affect our own personal farm. So there are a lot of other issues that we have. There's the issue of security. There's the issue, which is actually the most predominant cause of food, shortage of food in Nigeria, is the insecurity. How can that be tackled? So I think, because if you look at the movement of a president, let's talk about the president's cost to move the president first. That is a lot of money to actually move the president. Then imagine all of the other delegates who have to actually go with the government, with the president. To what extent do we get the value for the money that we go to these places to actually do? That's actually one of the most predominant questions that we need to ask. What were the kind of outcomes that actually benefits Nigeria and Nigeria's reality for this large sum of delegates? But again, just to also put it out there and make it clear, the government did not sponsor 1,400 plus. The government sponsored just 422.
All right, so now, after the list actually came out, there was a lot of public outrage by Nigerians. How would you evaluate the communication strategy employed by the Nigerian government in justifying the large delegation, even though it's just 400, it's still large, to the summit? And how do you think it effectively addresses the concerns of the citizens who might be critical of such a decision?
I think the government needs to be very, very consistent with its approach and talk about how it's going to be pushing delegates for these international conferences. The president was very strict and very direct in the UN General Assembly in September, where he said if you do not have an itinerary, if you're not on the itinerary, he doesn't want to see you in the US. And I think he should have employed the same strategy here. He should have made it very clear: if you're not on the itinerary, you should not be in the UAE. Because, for example, we had a military issue just few days ago, which is actually part of one of your headlines, and the Minister of Defense is at COP. What is he doing there? What use is the Minister of Defense doing? What is the value for Nigeria that the Minister of Defense is giving to us by being at COP28, especially now that we actually need him to be in the country? Because right now there's that issue going on in Kaduna. Kaduna state government is trying to see how we can sort it out, but the absence of the federal minister of defense sort of undermines the efforts of that subnational government, because the military is under his purview and not under the purview of the state government. So I think these are some of the issues that we actually need to actually find a way to address. If the president was as strict and as firm as he was during the United Nations General Assembly, and then he allowed for that to continue into COP28 and every other international conferences, then I think there will be, everybody then embodies it and knows that the president does not like high delegation, too much number to go for international conferences, and that would actually automatically reduce eventually.
All right, well, Murkthar, this is actually coming at a time where, this, like you said, there's so much hardship in the country, and there has actually been a clamor for the reduction of the cost of governance, not even talking about how much those 400 over people would, spend on accommodation, transportation, feeding, and all that. How would you advise the government to communicate its participation in COP28 to the Nigerian public, especially in addressing concerns about allocation of resources and the delegation's potential impact on addressing local issues?
I think the most important thing would be to link the objectives of why we are at COP to the outcomes of the realities of Nigerians. If the government can do that significantly, then it becomes easier for us to actually accept, because I think that's where the government is actually falling short currently. We cannot see the link as Nigerians. Now we are clamoring for steady power in the country, and we know that the easiest ways to generate the highest number of power is not through renewable energy, because we cannot afford to do that at this point. So if we're at COP28, if we're at COP28, 29, any other ones, how does that translate to our current realities, and how does it help us in our current socio-economic dilemma that we're actually facing in the country? If they can link those things up, then it becomes easier for Nigerians. There's a need for us to actually be present there, because we have to ensure the localization of phenomena. So we cannot do it alone. We cannot exist as a singular country. We have to collaborate. We have to talk about global international standards for most of these things to ensure that the economic activities we're doing here does not affect other countries in other places. So how can the government link that? That's one thing that's actually been missing from government communication, actually, linking out activities to the outcomes of how it impacts the lives of everyday Nigerians. If the government can actually sort that chain out, it becomes very easy for Nigerians to rally behind and actually put. Of course, there's going to be criticism, but criticisms are necessary because your ideas cannot be foolproof. Whatever ideas you do cannot be foolproof, and it allows for improvement. So I think the government needs to actually do more and be more deliberate in their communications approach. So 402 delegates at the COP, what is the impact for the average farmer in Gwagwalada, for example, or a big industry in Lagos?
All right, well, thank you so much, communications strategist Murkthar Suleiman, for joining me to give your view on the COP28.
Thank you very much for having me.